Good morning. And let me extend my welcome to all who are here, especially our guests. We're so thankful that you've joined together with us today. I want to piggyback off of last week and our theme that we had of living hope. We talk and we even sing a lot about hope. But what does that look like on a daily basis? I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, I would probably say there are a number of believers in Jesus Christ who live hope-deprived lives more than they live hope-filled lives. That maybe it's circumstances or situations that leave us to feel small, unable, unprepared, alone. That we are lacking the resources that we need to live the kind of life that we desire to live. It's easy to see what is in front of us as too big and not even worth trying. That we stand at the bottom of a mountain of trouble and we want to give up before we ever take the first step. That we want and we look for hope. But we want to see it in some noticeable way. And yet it feels like it never comes, and so we live more in fear. On and on the cycle goes. And it becomes harder for us to have hope. Maybe for our marriages, hope for our children, hope for our relationships. Maybe we get to the point where we feel we struggle, maybe we don't have hope for our church. And we struggle to see God's path for us. And maybe we even question, are we going to make it? You say, well, Adam, that's a really great way to start off a lesson on hope. I'm not trying to be a downer here, but I think sometimes it's easy for us to talk about hope, but it's another thing to say, okay, well, what does that really look like in my life when all around me is just a mess? When my life is a mess? How do faith and hope truly work in that? How do we live in hope? And that's what I want us to spend just a few moments on this morning. And what I would say is really, if we boil that down, the reality is that we don't have a hope problem, we have a sight problem. Because we have hope. Jesus is that hope. That's where we were last week as we were defining it. Hope is not a set of circumstances. Hope is not an idea. Hope, as we defined it, the confident expectation that there will be better things in our future. That hope is in a person, Jesus Christ. You see, He came to experience what we experience. He came to defeat what defeats us so that we might have hope. Our salvation means that right now we have a personal relationship with the one who created us, the one who is defined as hope. And we can expect something better in our future because He lives and He is our Savior. That's what we saw last week. But the question is, do we see this hope in the middle of our mess that we call Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or whatever day of the week it is? when we're in the midst of the struggles, when we're in the midst of just not knowing where to go and how do I make a sense of all of this, do we see that hope? This morning, I'd actually invite you to look at someone else's mess. If you would, turn to Exodus chapter 14. Exodus chapter 14. And here we find the nation of Israel. They have been in slavery in the land of Egypt. God has heard their cry. He has come and He has delivered them through 10 plagues that have decimated the nation of Egypt. And what we see now is they have left, or they are leaving Egypt. And picking up the reading there in verse 1 of Exodus 14, Yahweh, the Lord, who is speaking to Moses, and He says to Moses, "Tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Piharoth, between Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal Zephon, opposite it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his armies, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. And they said, "What is this that we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. And he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over them all. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel. And the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them, camping by the sea beside Piharoth in the front of Baal Zephon. Just sort of put your mind in this situation. Here is this nation of over 1 million people who are exiting this land. And as I said, the 10 plagues decimated the land of Egypt, the nation of Egypt. And so the people are now leaving, and Pharaoh, he again has a change of heart, as we have seen throughout this in the book of Exodus. He continually says one thing and then he goes back and says something else. And so he has this change of heart. He says, wait a minute, what have I just done? My whole workforce is leaving me. I need to go get them back. So what does he do? He takes his whole army. 600 iron chariots and all the other chariots. You think, well, okay, it's a chariot. I'd put it in this way. Think like 600 tanks are coming after you. We can relate to that. Okay, 600 tanks. Wow, okay, what am I going to do? That's where we see Israel at this point. They're out in the wilderness. God has not taken them by the quick route of the coastal way. He's taken them into the wilderness, and it appears, at least to Pharaoh, as if they're just wandering around out there. And so he sets his attack against them. Now, I want us to sort of set aside this idea of hope for just a moment, and we'll come back to it, because there's something else that we need to think about first, and that is weakness. If I could just have you, by raising your hand, how many of you think you're weak? Okay, some. But I would say most of the time we don't admit that we are weak. Let alone do we want anybody else to know that we are weak. I mean, think about it. This nation, in one sense, grew up with the adage, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps and you can do whatever it is you want. That idea of strength, we celebrate the independence of the individual in this nation. You have a resume. Well, what is a resume? It shows you all of your strengths, all of your accomplishments, what you have done. So we don't like weakness. And what that means is then, if we don't like weakness, then we act like we can handle things that we can't handle. We pretend to know things that we don't know, and we don't ask the questions that we should ask. There's a reason why you get into a classroom and somebody says, ask any question. There's no dumb question. Why do we say that? Because we're all afraid to ask the dumb question. We're afraid to show our weakness. I want you to see this. Israel gave the appearance of strength. Did you catch that at the end of verse 8? That it said that the sons of Israel were going out, depending on your translation, it may say boldly. Some translations actually use the word defiantly. I mean, think about what has happened. The Egyptians are saying, just leave, get out of here. You have cost us so much. And they're actually saying, here, take gold, take silver, just take it with you, just go. And so the children of Israel are going, yeah, okay. We're going. They go out boldly. And yet, notice what happens beginning there in verse 10. As Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to Yahweh. Then they said to Moses, is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. I want you to see what they did here. They looked around and they saw Pharaoh. They saw the army coming. Boldness left them. Fear set in. And they cry out to the Lord. They cry out to Yahweh. But notice what they're really doing. Because they immediately, yes, they cry out to Yahweh, but they immediately come and they sarcastically criticize Moses. Were there no graves in Egypt that you had to bring us out here? Egypt had plenty of graves, okay? That's not a literal question. They're sarcastically asking this of Moses. They're saying, wait a minute, why did you bring us out here? We told you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians so that we can have peace. What are they doing here? They're trying to portray some portion of strength, even if it's to Moses, while they're wrapped up in their fear. Because what we see, they're going to be pinned in from the sea and the army on the other side. There's nowhere for them to go. You see, we weren't made to be independent and to do things on our own. We were formed to be dependent on the one who made us and to rely upon His grace. I want you to think about this. God doesn't hold us to a standard of independent strength. We are weak. And He knows that. Do you realize that God is not shocked by your weakness? He doesn't wake up one day and go, Whoa, wait a minute. Adam, you are so pathetic. He doesn't say that. You all might, and that's okay. God says, I know how pathetic you are, Adam. I made you. I know your weaknesses. That doesn't shock him in any way. You know who's shocked by our weaknesses? You and me. We're embarrassed by our weaknesses. So what do? We put on a mask, we put on a facade in public so nobody knows how weak I am. I'm going to project strength so that you think that I'm strong. And what I do when I am in private is I just deceive myself, thinking, yeah, okay, I got this, I can handle this. You see, God confronts us with our weaknesses for a reason. There's a story about a father and his young son. And the father comes upon his son one day, and the son is like, say, 3, maybe 4 years old. And we'll say he's playing with Legos, okay? Not the duplex big blocks. This is like the small stuff, the stuff that really requires great detail and somebody older than a 3-year-old to put together the Legos, okay? I want you to get where I'm going with this. So the father comes and he sees his child trying to put this together. But with every brick that he puts on, the child gets more aggravated, more incensed, because he cannot get this. And so here's what the father said. He said, I wanted to take over and assemble the item at that moment, but then it hit me. My son needed to experience his weakness so that he could ask for my care. So I walked out of the room and left him on his own, angry, incapable, and exasperated. I didn't leave because I was mad or needed peace and quiet, nor did I think walking away was the best way to punish him. On the contrary, I walked away because I loved my boy. And that course of action was the best way to get him to recognize, seek, and appreciate my love. In my imperfect, finite parenting wisdom, I had confidence about what would happen next. I knew my son would not be able to do what he was fighting so hard to do independently. And it was only a matter of time before he gave up, admitted his weakness to himself, and sought my help. He goes on to say, about a half an hour later, he hears the pitter-patter of the little feet walking down the hall, tears in the young boy's eyes. He comes and he says, Daddy, I can't do it. To which the father replies, what do you want? And he says, I need your help. You see, God confronts us with our weaknesses because we need to understand that. And we need to then come to Him recognizing we can't do it on our own, but we need His help. We need His strength. Continue on with me in verse 13 then of Exodus 14. The people have just criticized Moses. Moses' response to the people now is, do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will accomplish for you today. And the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. God wanted them to understand who was fighting for them, who was going to deliver them. There's a man, Dallas Jenkins. He's the creator of the Chosen TV series. And he makes reference several times as he's going through and trying to produce this TV series. He says, there have been so many times in my life that I now call Red Sea moments. And he says, what I mean by that is I believe that there are times in our lives where God brings us to the Red Sea, whatever the Red Sea might be in your life, just so that we can know that it is Him who is going to deliver us. God calls us to mountains that are too high for you and I to climb. He leads us to taste failure so that we will find hope in Him and accept His grace. You see, we need to understand our weaknesses, before we can really understand hope in Jesus. And so let's talk about everyday hope then. Because as God's children, hope is lived out by our trust in Him and what His power will do in our lives. Paul Tripp says it this way: you not only have been forgiven by the grace of the gospel and guaranteed a place in eternity with your Savior. Now let's stop for just a moment. A lot of times I think that's what we consider, that's our hope. I've been forgiven of my sins. I am now a child of God, and there's an eternity for me. There's hope beyond this life, which that is true. But there's something more to your hope. Paul Tripp goes on, he says, but you also have been given or have been granted by the very same grace all that you need to be what God has called you to be and to do the things God has called you to do in the place where He has put you. God says, I've got you. And you got a place after this life. But I'm also giving you everything that you need right now so that you can become what I want you to be in this moment, in the place where you are. You see, Israel had to go forward. Notice verse 15 of Exodus 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through in the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh. When I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and horsemen. Notice what God says here. He says three things. He says, the nation of Israel is to move forward. Move forward into where? The sea. You got the army behind you. You got to move forward into the sea. To Moses, he says, what you're going to do, you're going to hold up your staff and you are going to divide the sea. What I'm going to do, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart so that I will be honored in his actions. I want you to think about that for a moment. That the people had to trust God that He would save them, and that they had to move forward. If I'm understanding this correctly, I don't think that God divided the sea, they saw the clear path, and said, okay, Israel, that's where you go. I don't think that's what He's saying here. He's telling Israel, go forward. Where are we going, God? Into the sea. You realize it's a sea. Yes, go. I'll take care of that. Continue reading then in verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yahweh swept back the sea by a strong east wind all night. and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided. The sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Would you use your imagination for just one moment? I want you to put yourself in the shoes of an Israelite. It's nighttime. You witness the cloud of the pillar of cloud that is there by day and the pillar of fire by night. This cloud now moves behind you. It's been leading you, but now it moves behind you, and it situates such that it is blocking the entire Egyptian army from you. But it's night. I would imagine besides the pillar of fire that's behind you, there's very little light that you would have. Maybe the torches that you might have. You're told, go into the sea. The sea begins to part. Think about the walls of water on one side and the other side of you. What would that have been like? As you get into it, is it something that you just look up and maybe all you can see is the night sky in just this one narrow band? I don't know. Is it that as you are walking by and you're carrying your small torch, you look to one wall and you see fish looking at you? I don't know. I mean, what does God's creation do when he takes it out of the natural way of things? Was it silent, or were there screams from the nation of Israel as they went through? Think about it. I mean, you go to a haunted house. Granted, they're trying to jump out and scare you, but what happens when people are in the dark? Little kids scream, right? I mean, was it just silence, or was there people? Were there babies? Were there adults who were going, I don't know what's going on? How long would it take for you to feel safe that the walls of water are not coming down upon you? Would it take halfway? Would it take until you're all the way on the other side going, okay, I made it? You see, this is all our humanity that goes around in our heads. It took an entire night for over 1 million people to cross the Red Sea. God was continually keeping that east wind blowing such that they could all cross on dry land. He told them, you move forward. What does that mean? Our job is to follow God in faith each moment of our life. So, okay, that's what we say all the time, and that's what I see, in God's Word. But what does that mean? I would say it means this: we don't wait for God's provisions before we move. We want that. We want God to just say, here you go. I've got everything taken care of. This is this. Here you do this, this, and this, and this. That's not what God told Israel. He says, go forward. Faith means we're not promised to see everything beforehand. What was it like for the first people, the front lines of Israel, as they go into the sea? Did God just completely open that up? Or was it that it was progressive, like as they took one more step and one more step, the wall of water in front of them continued to go further back? I don't know. We're not told that. But God doesn't promise us the full path as we live our lives. He doesn't say, you get to know everything that's going on. He says, all I'm telling you, go forward. Faith means we don't figure out how God is going to meet our needs. Has this ever been to you in prayer? It's been me. I lay out a whole plan for God. God, you need to do this and this and this. And then when you do that, then I need you to go over here and I need to take care of this and do this and do this and do this. That's not what faith is. Faith is relying upon God saying, you got this. You take care of it, not me. I'm just going to trust in you that you know what you're doing. You see, faith means that we admit our weaknesses and we move forward in the certainty that God is with us, He is for us, and He is in us. And that He will use His awesome power to work in our lives. If you look, the Exodus story and the Red Sea parting is like the major event that follows throughout the rest of the Old Testament and into the New Testament. Imagine that you are one of those Israelites who crossed that night, uncertain. Maybe you're one of those who screamed as you went through. But you make it to the other side, and you go, wow, God did that. Take it a step further, then you see all of the Egyptians rushing through, and the water falls in on them. Wow. That's the God we serve. See, Paul prays something in Ephesians 1 that I think each and every one of us need. He says in Ephesians 1 and verse 18, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, so that you will know what is the hope of His calling, what are the riches of the glory of His inheritance in the saints, and what is the surpassing greatness of His power toward us who believe. You see, we don't have a hope problem. We've got the hope. We have a sight problem because we can't see it that often. And what Paul says here is he's saying, I am praying that your heart will be enlightened, that light will shine on your heart so that you can see. Well, what can we see? The hope of God's calling. The hope of what God wants you to be tomorrow. Have you ever thought about that? What is God's view of you tomorrow, Monday morning? What is He already knows what you're going to encounter. He knows the situations that you're going to have. What is His view? What does He want for you? You see, God has that plan. He says, this is what I'm calling you to be. I'm calling you to be like my Son. He says, I want you to see that. I want you to see and understand that you are my inheritance. Let me say that again. We are God's inheritance. That's what He says right here. And then He goes on and says, and I want you to understand the surpassing greatness of His power that is to us who believe in Him. What kind of power is that? Paul goes on in the next verse and he says, it's resurrection power. The same power that God used to raise His Son from the dead. That is the power that is there for you and me each and every moment. It's Red Sea power that is there to mold us and to change us into what He wants us to be. And say, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? Does your marriage seem hopeless sometimes? Are you struggling with a relationship in your life? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe you look at it and you say, the vision that our elders presented to us, it just seems unrealistic. I'm trying to paint the picture here that it can be anything that is in your life right now. What is it that you are standing at the bottom of the mountain, looking up and going, that's too big. I can't do it. The point of it all is this. It is not to think, I need to go and make this happen. It is to fall to our knees and say, I am weak, my Father. Please help me. That's where it has to begin. That He is going to say, I am going to take you. I'm going to help you. But that doesn't begin until we recognize our weakness. To where we put down our facade, or we take off our mask and say, you're right, God. I got to stop trying to be strong in myself and be strong in you. Whatever it is, all things are possible with God. The question is, do we believe that? Do we believe that our marriage is going to be better if we rely upon God? Do we believe that the vision that is put in front of us as members here is going to be something that we can succeed at because God is in control? Paul prays this prayer because he realizes that it is a struggle for us to be able to see with our heart, to be able to see with faith. But that's what it means. To live in hope is to live in Jesus. And the more that we trust Him, the more that we open our hearts to Him, the more we see God working in our lives. So this morning I ask you, are you living in hope? That means every aspect of your life is influenced by God and His power. Is that work? Is that right for you? Is that what is true for you? Or do you need to make a change? God's still given us this day, this moment, to come to Him and do what is right. And that is submit to Him and say, I am broken. I need your help. Each and every one of us are broken. No one is any better than any other person in this room. But it is all by the grace of God that we are what we are. Do you need more of that grace? Do you need our Savior? He's calling to you. Won't you come as together we stand and sing?